On the night of her biggest exhibition, Clara waited in the rain for a husband who never showed up. Later she found him smiling in another woman's arms, the assistant he once swore was harmless. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply liked the post, then accepted an invitation that would change her life forever. It was supposed to be the biggest night of my year, of my career even, but all I could think about was whether my husband would walk through the door. The rain clung to the windows of the East Wing like a restless whisper, its soft patter echoing in the otherwise silent gallery. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass, arms folded loosely, my heart doing things my face refused to reveal. Outside, the city lights blurred behind sheets of rain. Inside, the staff moved like shadows, adjusting the lighting, straightening name cards, lowering the music to just the right hum. Everything was perfect. The kind of night that takes months to build. I waited. Clara, Zoe Lynn called gently behind me. They're asking if you'd like to start the reception early. Some guests arrived ahead of schedule. I turned, smiled, nodded. We'll start in 15. Let's keep it on time. She gave me a knowing look, kind, cautious, but didn't ask the question that hovered between us. I appreciated that. Zoe always knew when not to press. When she walked away, I checked my phone for the 6th time in as many minutes. Still no message from Nathan. A part of me was already rehearsing the excuses he'd offer if he showed up late. Boardroom crisis, flight delay, forgotten meeting. He had a way of folding every apology into charm, smoothing over disappointment with a look, a touch, a few words I used to believe. And then the screen lit up. One message. From Nathan Hale. Something came up. I won't be coming. I stared at it, unmoving. 4 years of loving him. 3 years of marriage. Countless nights I had paced beside gallery floors, talking to myself about the next exhibit, the next artist, the next impossible budget, and every time hoping he'd listen the next time. Tonight I had hoped harder than I cared to admit. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to say, really? Tonight? I wanted to say, why is it always me waiting? But I said nothing. Instead, I slid the phone back into the pocket of my coat and took a deep breath. Until the screen lit up again. This time it wasn't Nathan. It was a social media notification, from someone I never followed but always watched. At Sienna Monroe just posted a story. My stomach clenched. Against my better judgment, I tapped it open. There was a photo of a dashboard. His dashboard. The same interior I had helped design down to the thread. The espresso leather, the brass-trimmed controls, the minimalist clock I insisted gave it personality. I had gifted him the tiny reindeer charm hanging from the mirror last Christmas, wrapped it in tissue and ribbon and tied it to a bottle of wine. He called it ridiculous, then hung it anyway. It was still there. Sienna's caption read, "Thank you, Mr. Hale, for driving me home in the rain, 2 hearts." She had tagged no one. But she didn't have to. My vision blurred for a second. I blinked it away. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone. I simply tapped the heart icon. The story showed a red heart glowing under my name. Then I put my phone away and walked to the podium. By the time the reception began, I had sealed every crack in my composure. The guests arrived steadily. Curators, collectors, city officials, a few critics I didn't particularly like but had to impress anyway. I greeted them all with grace, as if my husband hadn't just chosen someone else's company over mine. As if his assistant's heart emoji wasn't still pulsing behind my temples. As if my heart hadn't shriveled in that moment and folded itself away. I smiled for photographs. I gave directions to the installation rooms. I corrected the typo on the name card for the Polish sculptor I had flown in personally. When Zoe offered to adjust the schedule, I shook my head. We'll begin on time. And at 7 o'clock sharp, I walked to the mic and welcomed everyone to the exhibition. Thank you all for being here, I began, voice clear and smooth. Tonight's collection, titled Unspoken Lines, is a culmination of what I believe art can do in the quiet moments. The pieces in this room speak not through noise but through tension. Through absence. A few people smiled, nodding thoughtfully. I smiled too. No one could hear what I meant. Not really. I continued, introducing the theme and the featured artists. I acknowledged the gallery sponsors and our international collaborators. When someone asked whether Nathan would be arriving later, I laughed politely and said, he had a last-minute business engagement. But he sends his support. Zoe met my eyes from the back of the room. I could tell she wanted to say something. But I gave her a small shake of the head. I didn't want to hear it. Not tonight. Especially not tonight. After the speech, the room swelled with polite chatter and the soft clink of glasses. Guests migrated between canvas works and sculpture installations, murmuring praise and critique. I stood beside one of the centerpieces, The Weight of Stillness, a minimalist piece I had poured months into. It was an abstract expression of waiting, of silence, of rooms where no one speaks but everything is said. A gallery director from Milan approached. "The emotional control in this piece, remarkable," he said. "It's about loss, isn't it?" "Yes," I replied with a smile. "Something like that." I stayed another hour, moving among the guests, accepting compliments, pretending not to see when people glanced around, wondering where Nathan Hale was. By 9:30 the crowd had thinned. The mayor's aide had left. The wine bottles were emptier. The laughter quieter. I stayed near the back entrance, nodding goodbye as people left. Each departing pair looked perfect, polished, close, aligned. At least for the night. Zoe walked over. "Everyone's thrilled. Your speech was the highlight of the night." "Thank you," I said. She hesitated. "Do you want me to finish closing up?" "No. I've got it." She nodded and didn't ask about Nathan. That's what I appreciated most about Zoe. She saw everything but never made me say it. The rain still hadn't stopped by the time I turned out the gallery lights. I stood in the dark for a moment, the artwork ghost-like in the shadows. The reverb of the evening lingered faintly in my bones. Music, applause, empty praise. I pulled out my phone one more time. No new message from Nathan. No follow-up. No explanation. But the notification from earlier was still there. Sienna's story. "Thank you, Mr. Hale, for driving me home in the rain, 2 hearts." That damn reindeer charm was still hanging from his mirror. I opened my inbox. There, unread since last week, was an email from the Vanguard Collective. The subject line read, "Official invitation. Artist residency and international exhibition collaboration." I had ignored it for days. I didn't want to make a decision he wouldn't approve of. I didn't want to plan a life he might not follow me into. But something about tonight, about the silence in the car, the reindeer charm, the speech I gave alone, shifted the weight in my chest. I opened the email. My fingers hovered over the reply button. Then I typed 3 words. "I accept. Thank you." And I hit send. Nathan came home well after 2 a.m. I was in bed but not asleep. The exhibition had ended hours ago, but my mind was still moving, sorting through faces, compliments, conversations. And then there was the silence beside me, the weight of the space where he should have been standing, the sound of rain still ticking at the windows like a metronome for disappointment. The door clicked open. The sound of polished leather shoes on wood. The familiar rustle of his coat being hung, tie being pulled off, phone placed gently on the entryway table. He paused in the hallway when he saw the faint light of my bedside lamp. "You're still up?" he asked softly, rubbing his neck. "I am." There was no edge in my voice, no accusation. Just a fact. He lingered for a moment as if expecting more. Then, "The event go okay?" "It did." He nodded, glancing down. "Sorry I missed it. Something urgent came up with the advisory board. The team couldn't wait." I didn't answer. I didn't even look at him. I kept reading the gallery catalog I'd already read twice. "I saw photos online," he added. "Looked like a good turnout." It was. Nathan crossed the room, slowly unbuttoning his cuffs. "Sienna was a big help today. She stayed late to finalize those investor decks." "Is that right?" He stopped mid-step. My tone hadn't changed. But maybe that was what caught him off guard. I didn't follow up with questions. I didn't ask what time the meeting ended. I didn't ask why her post went up when the clock still said 7:08 p.m. Instead I reached for the lamp. "Good night," I said. He stood still for a second longer, then nodded. "Yeah. Good night." And then he disappeared into the guest room. The next morning he was already dressed when I stepped into the kitchen. He looked up from his phone. "Morning." I made my coffee in silence. "You working from the gallery today?" he asked. I nodded. Nathan cleared his throat. "I was thinking maybe I could come by this weekend. See the full exhibit. I still haven't had a proper walkthrough." "You don't have to," I said. He blinked. No, I want to. I should have been there last night. I know that. I'm not upset, I replied. Just don't force it. He stared at me for a long moment as if trying to decipher the meaning behind my calm. But the truth was there was nothing left to decode. You're quiet lately, he said carefully. I'm just tired, I said. It's been a long month. Nathan opened his mouth to say something, then changed his mind. He reached for his coat instead. I've got an 11 a.m. downtown, he said. I'll be back late. Maybe we can have dinner. I have meetings. He nodded again. Hey. Then maybe tomorrow. He walked to the door, hesitated, then left. Once he was gone, I finally exhaled. The air felt different when he wasn't around. I didn't feel lighter exactly, but I didn't feel like I had to brace for something. For a lie. For a half-truth. For that subtle pull of guilt I'd been wearing like a scarf for years. I picked up my laptop and opened the Vanguard Collective's welcome package. I had responded to their invitation the night of the exhibition, finally. And today I had every intention of following through. There were forms to complete, logistics to finalize, travel schedules to sort. The collaboration was based in Vanguard City and would last several months. Possibly longer if I was offered the curatorship they were quietly preparing for. But that wasn't what gave me pause. It was the simple realization that I hadn't told Nathan any of this. Not yet. And stranger still, I wasn't sure I needed to. Later that day I returned to the gallery. Zoe met me with a tablet in hand and a knowing look. You didn't sleep much, did you? I smiled faintly. That obvious? You fake it well. But I've seen enough hungover artists to know what fatigue looks like. She handed me the schedule. Full day. Press interviews at 10. And I penciled in the Vanguard call at 2. Let me know if you want to keep that private. Thanks, I said. I do. Zoe hesitated, then added, I saw Sienna's post last night. I didn't react. She tagged the location as Rainy City Nights with a heart emoji. I nodded. I know. You're not even going to ask him about it? No. Zoe studied me. You've changed. I've just stopped pretending I can't see what's right in front of me. That evening I sat at my desk, sipping tea, reviewing shipment details for an upcoming artist installation. Nathan came home after 9. He entered the room cautiously. Hey. I brought dinner, he said. From that Thai place you like. I already ate. Oh. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, holding the paper bag like a peace offering. I can leave it in the fridge, he said after a beat. Sure. He placed the bag down and lingered. I meant what I said this morning. I want to support your work more. Really? Okay, I said simply. Nathan took a breath. Sienna. She just posted that photo because I offered her a ride. It was raining and she doesn't have a car. I didn't ask. His mouth opened slightly but no words came. You're not angry? He asked. I don't have the energy to be angry, I said, looking up at him. Not anymore. He swallowed hard. I know I haven't been the husband you deserve. I'm trying, Clara. Are you? That stopped him. I think you're just scared now that I'm not chasing after you, I added. Nathan stared at me and for a moment I almost believed he wanted to say something honest. But he didn't. He just nodded, said I'll let you work, and walked away. That night I opened the bottom drawer of my studio cabinet. Inside was a box I hadn't touched in years. I opened it carefully. Inside were small pieces of the woman I used to be, love notes I never gave him, matchbooks from restaurants we used to pretend we'd return to, and one folded slip of paper I had never forgotten. It was the scrap I found in his coat pocket 3 winters ago. A chain store receipt wrapped around a phone number. A tiny red heart drawn beside the digits. When I asked him about it, he had snatched it from my hand and said, Don't go through my stuff. I'd asked again, a little too calmly. Who is she? A client, he'd replied flatly. Don't make a big deal out of nothing. I had tried to believe him. But after that day I started checking his phone. Then his browser history. Then his messages. Until all that energy I once poured into my paintings, my joy, my instinct, my creativity, had been funneled into surveillance and self-doubt. He didn't need to hurt me outright. He just needed to leave me wondering. And I had played right into it. The next morning we sat across from each other at breakfast again. Nathan read through his emails. I drank my coffee. You're going to the gallery today? He asked, not looking up. Of course. I thought maybe we could take the evening off. Go out for dinner. Just us. I have a call with Vanguard. His eyes snapped up. Vanguard. I met his gaze. I didn't mention. They offered me a residency position. He blinked. When did that happen? The night of the exhibition. He frowned. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't think you were paying attention. His lips parted slightly, then closed again. How long will it be? A few months. Maybe more. He exhaled slowly. And you're going? Yes. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It wasn't dramatic. It was just empty, like a marriage made of ghosts. The morning I left for Vanguard City, the apartment was quiet. Nathan hadn't come home the night before. Or if he had, it was sometime after I'd fallen asleep. I found the living room exactly as I'd left it. Clean, cold, still. The echo of a marriage that now only existed in shared utility bills and well-rehearsed small talk. My suitcase was by the door. One medium-sized piece of luggage and a leather carry-on. Everything I needed to start over. Or at least to breathe. The Vanguard Collective had sent a driver. He waited patiently downstairs, scrolling through his phone as the rain made ribbons across the sidewalk. The sky above the city was its usual bruised gray. The perfect background for a clean break. I left a short note on the kitchen counter. Nathan left for Vanguard. We'll be in touch if needed. No heart. No flourish. Just a period. The door clicked shut behind me. I didn't look back. The car pulled away from the curb, and with every block we passed I felt lighter. Vanguard City was 3 hours away. Just enough distance to feel new, but not far enough to forget everything I was leaving behind. As the skyline disappeared in the rearview mirror, I leaned my head against the window and let myself exhale for the first time in weeks. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I felt empty. But in a good way. The kind of emptiness that meant space was opening up. For me. By the time I arrived at the gallery's guest residence, it was nearly afternoon. The Vanguard Collective had arranged a 2-bedroom apartment in the heart of the artist district. Industrial ceilings, wide windows, and walls lined with pastels and charcoal renderings left behind by previous residents. There was a welcome note on the table. Fresh flowers in a vase. A schedule clipped neatly on the fridge. Everything prepared with care. I dropped my suitcase and stood in the center of the living room, staring at the space like I wasn't sure I was really allowed to be here. Then I took a deep breath and smiled. I had made it. Not because someone opened a door for me, but because I had opened one for myself. Work began the very next morning. The Vanguard project was even more ambitious than I expected. A multi-gallery international collaboration meant to showcase rising talent and underserved voices in contemporary art. The team was sharp, opinionated, brilliant. Our director, Elise Marceau, ran meetings like orchestral rehearsals, quick, exacting, and relentless. I loved it. There was no time to overthink, no space for distraction. I spent 10-hour days immersed in artist profiles, curatorial themes, and visual storytelling strategy. I hadn't felt this alive professionally in years. And for once no one asked me about Nathan. No one looked at me like someone's wife. I was just Clara Evans, curator. Creator. Someone. 3 days into the project I received a message from Nathan. How's the project going? I stared at it for a moment, then replied. Busy. A lot of work to be done. He responded 10 minutes later. Do you need anything? I didn't reply. The next day another message. Call me when you're free. This time I responded. Can't talk this week. Exhibition planning is full on. He sent no reply. I placed the phone face down and went back to reviewing floor plans. By the end of the first week, I had stopped wondering whether Nathan would call again. The funny thing was, I used to text him everything. A photo of a coffee I liked. A video of an installation I was moved by. Questions about colors, layout, quotes. Even when he didn't answer for hours, I would still try. Back then, it felt like something between us could still be saved, as long as I kept holding the thread. Now the thread was gone. And I didn't miss the weight of pulling it. On Monday Zoe messaged me. Nathan dropped by the gallery today. Swear you were. Looked tense. I replied. Thanks for letting me know. That was it. Later that evening I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something told me to. Clara. Nathan's voice. I closed my eyes. Yes. I'm in Vanguard. My stomach didn't twist. My heart didn't race. Why? I need to talk to you. In person. I'm busy, I said plainly. I'll wait. And he did. He was sitting on a bench outside the gallery building the next afternoon. I saw him through the glass doors as I ended a meeting with Elise and the lead design team. He looked out of place, corporate suit against the backdrop of paint-smeared jeans and tattooed arms. The man I once thought stood above the rest now looked smaller. I walked out to him, clipboard still in hand. You really came, I said. He stood. You look different. I feel different. He looked around. This place suits you. It does. He studied me carefully as if trying to read something that used to be familiar. Are you hungry? I asked, motioning to the cafe across the street. They make a great lentil soup. He blinked at me. Do you even care if I'm hungry? The question didn't sting. I shrugged. You've asked me that 100 times before. But you never meant it. He followed me across the street. We sat by the window. I ordered soup. He didn't order anything. You've changed, he said. I've reclaimed space. You're colder. I'm calmer. He leaned forward. Clara, I've been messaging you. I don't know what's going on. You used to call me every day when you traveled. You used to tell me everything. Now you don't even ask how I'm doing. I stirred my soup, then met his eyes. And how many of those calls did you want to answer? How many times did you reply to those messages without me having to resend them first? He didn't answer. I continued. Back then I thought if I stopped trying we'd disappear. That my love was something I had to perform constantly or else it would vanish. Nathan looked away. I used to be afraid of losing you, I said quietly. Now I've realized. I've already lost you. He rubbed his jaw, exhaling. You were always too intense. Too emotional. And you were always too absent. Too silent. Now you're shutting me out, he said. No, I said, shaking my head gently. Now I'm letting myself in. We didn't argue. We didn't cry. We just sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Nathan asked, so what does this mean for us? I smiled sadly. That version of us, the one where I waited, begged, chased, it's gone. You sound sure. I am. He nodded slowly. Then, do you still love me? I looked at him long and steady. I love who I was when I loved you. But that woman's no longer here. He said nothing. Just stared down at the table. I placed my spoon down, stood and picked up my clipboard. Take care of yourself, Nathan. And then I walked out of the cafe, back into the gallery, back into the version of my life where I no longer needed to be rescued. The exhibition space was buzzing. It had been 4 weeks since I arrived in Vanguard City, and already our team's first collaborative show was drawing press coverage from multiple national outlets. Elise was thrilled, the artists were energized, and for once in years I felt seen, for my work, my voice, not just my title as someone's wife. On opening night, I was halfway through a walkthrough with a critic from the Vanguard Times when I spotted him again. Nathan. He stood near the entrance in a tailored navy suit, blending in just enough to appear intentional but out of place amidst the creatives in paint-splattered boots and sculptor's gloves. I paused. Just briefly. Clara, the critic prompted. Apologies, I said smoothly. Shall we continue? Nathan watched as I guided the critic through the exhibit without acknowledging him. His presence didn't rattle me. It didn't even surprise me. He'd shown up to 2 previous gallery events this week. Always late, always alone. Always watching. Later, as the crowd thinned and the music dimmed, I made my way toward the back terrace to get some air. He was already there. Beautiful turnout, he said as I stepped beside the railing. Yes, I replied. We're very proud of the curation. He turned to face me, searching my expression. You're glowing, he said. I'm busy. That too. I looked at him. What do you want, Nathan? He hesitated. I want to support you. I raised an eyebrow. Support me. I have contacts in the museum board. Sponsors who might be interested in backing future exhibits. I can make introductions. And why now? He blinked. I'm just trying to help, he said, softer this time. You had years to be present, I said. You had years to show up, to ask, to care. And now that I don't need you, you show up with a list of favors. It's not like that. It is, I replied gently. But I'm not angry. I just don't need anything from you anymore. He stepped closer. Can we at least talk? As friends. I shook my head. I'm not the kind of woman who waits for breadcrumbs, Nathan. I'm not her anymore. He looked like he wanted to argue, to plead, to say it wasn't too late. But I didn't give him the chance. Thank you for coming, I said, stepping past him. The wine is better in the East Gallery. You should try it. And with that I walked away. Back at the residence that night I kicked off my shoes, turned off my phone and pulled my hair up into a bun. My feet ached. My eyes burned. But I felt good. Exhausted. Accomplished. Untouched. Zoe sent me a quick text. Saw Nathan again. Third time this week. You okay? I typed back, he's just now realizing he lost me. Her reply came with a gif of a woman sipping champagne. 2 days later, during a team break, I was scrolling through social media absent-mindedly when a post from Sienna Monroe appeared on my feed. She stood in a softly lit wine bar, a glass of something pink in her hand, her lips half-parted in a practiced pout. But what caught my eye wasn't her pose. It was the necklace. Silver. Minimalist. A crescent pendant with a tiny opal stone. The exact one I'd admired in a boutique last year during a short trip to Tokyo. I hadn't said much, just paused in the window a moment too long. Nathan had noticed. You like that? He'd asked. I'd nodded. He'd said, I'll come back for it later. He never did. Now it hung against Sienna's collarbone like a quiet insult. The caption read, some things just fit better with the right person. Hashtag gifted, hashtag mine. It didn't hurt. It didn't sting. It felt like nothing. I pressed the little heart on the post and moved on. That afternoon, Zoe walked into my office with her phone. Did you see this? I did. She blinked. You liked it. I know. Claire, it's that necklace. The Tokyo one. I remember. She stared at me. Doesn't it bother you? I smiled faintly and shook my head. I used to. But not anymore. Zoe slowly sat down. I don't know whether to be impressed or concerned. Neither, I said. Just let it be what it is. She nodded slowly. You're really done, aren't you? I was done the moment I realized I'd been trying to win a race he wasn't even running. That night I stayed late at the gallery. Everyone else had gone home, but I wanted a few more hours alone with the lighting mock-ups and floor plans for the upcoming installation. I didn't notice the time until my stomach grumbled and the streetlights outside blinked to life. My phone buzzed once. Nathan again. Just saw Sienna's post. I didn't know she was going to wear it tonight. I bought it months ago. You're reading too much into it. I stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without replying. I closed my laptop, packed up my bag and turned out the gallery lights one by one. The next day he was waiting outside again. This time I didn't stop to greet him. He stood up as I passed, calling out, Clara, wait. I turned only because it was polite. What now? I didn't mean for that post to happen. I didn't even know she still had the necklace. You bought it for her. He flinched. I was trying to fix things between us at the time. Between you and her? I asked. He didn't answer. I shook my head. You want me to believe you're sorry, but you're not. You're just embarrassed. That's not true. Yes, it is, I said gently. And it's okay. You don't have to pretend anymore. I'm not the version of myself who needed your explanations. Or your jewelry. I made mistakes. We both did, I said. But the difference is, mine didn't involve breaking someone's heart. Nathan looked at me with eyes that might have once held power over me. Now they just looked tired. You look beautiful, by the way, he said softly. I smiled. So does freedom. By week's end, the gallery received a feature article in Modern Curator magazine praising our debut show as an emotionally intelligent and viscerally compelling curation led by Clara Evans, whose distinct perspective shapes space like poetry. Nathan forwarded me the article. No message. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed the article, framed it, and hung it above my desk. Zoe looked at it the next morning and smirked. You're becoming a bit of a legend, you know. I shrugged. Took long enough. As we headed into another team meeting, she paused beside me and asked, Do you ever miss him? I thought about it. About the way I used to wait by the door for his keys to turn. The way I'd try on outfits just to feel noticed. The way I once rehearsed conversations hoping for connection, for crumbs, for something real. Then I looked at the light coming through the gallery windows. And I said, I miss who I was before I forgot I mattered. And then I walked into the meeting. Curator, creator, woman untethered. It was raining again. Not the romantic kind that makes you curl up with tea in a book, but the hard, deliberate kind. The kind that scraped the sidewalks and washed the color out of the morning. I stepped out of the gallery with my coat tucked high around my neck, umbrella unopened, letting the cold soak into my skin. I didn't mind. These days I welcomed the clarity that came with discomfort. It reminded me I was alive, and not buried under someone else's silence anymore. My phone buzzed just as I reached the corner. Nathan, can we talk today? Please. Just 10 minutes. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before replying. 3 p.m. At the cafe across from the sculpture garden. Short. Decisive. There was nothing left to discuss, but I had something to give him. He was already seated when I arrived. The same window seat we used to claim together. Back then I would order chamomile tea. He'd get black coffee double shot. We'd sit side by side, legs brushing, talking about everything from gallery acquisitions to which color palettes were overused in modern sculpture. Now he looked up at me as if uncertain whether I would actually sit. I did. I placed a thin, flat envelope on the table. He stared at it like it was a live wire. What is that? He asked. Divorce papers. There was no dramatic swell of music. No tearful declarations. No slaps or shouts. Just me. Just him. Just paper. You're serious, he said after a pause. I nodded. Clara, he shook his head, his hands flat on the table as though grounding himself. I thought we were talking again. Trying. You were talking, I said quietly. I was listening. But I stopped explaining when I realized you never really were. He inhaled sharply. That's not fair. No, I said, it's not fair. But it's true. He sat back in his chair, the rain streaking down the window behind him like silver threads unraveling. His suit was pressed. His hair perfect. But something in his posture sagged. He looked at the envelope again. This isn't the answer, he said. To what question? To what we are. What we could still be. I studied him. Nathan, do you remember what last year's anniversary gift was? He blinked. You said you didn't want anything. I said I didn't want anything because you forgot it completely the year before. He looked away. And last year, I continued, you went to Dubai with your team. Sienna posted a picture. Fancy rooftop bar, champagne, you smiling beside her like the world made sense again. That trip was scheduled months prior. You scheduled it after I told you our anniversary fell that week. He winced. I leaned in slightly. I didn't say anything then. I didn't fight. I just told myself you were busy. That if I stayed patient, you'd eventually notice the things you used to love about me again. I did love those things. No, I corrected. You loved how easy I made things for you. How quiet I became. He didn't argue. Instead he asked softly, so this is it? Yes. Just like that. I tilted my head. Not just like that. It took years of quiet dinners. Unanswered messages. Walking alone into rooms I thought we'd enter as partners. Sitting beside you at functions where you introduced me as your plus one instead of your wife. His jaw tensed. It took forgetting my birthday twice, I added. It took watching you laugh at your phone during dinner and finding out later that it was because Sienna sent you a meme. His voice cracked. I was stupid. You were indifferent, I said. Stupid would have meant you cared and just didn't know how to show it. But you knew exactly how. You just didn't bother. He closed his eyes. I don't want this to be the end. It already is. We sat in silence for a long while. The waitress came by. He ordered coffee. I didn't order anything. I didn't need comfort or conversation. I needed finality. When the coffee arrived, he held the cup in both hands as though stalling. I thought we still had time, he whispered. I felt my throat tighten. Not with sadness but with the strange, surreal ache that comes from watching someone finally panic over a fire they ignored until the house burned down. You had time, I said gently. You just didn't use it. He looked down. I reached into my bag and pulled out a pen, placing it beside the envelope. You don't have to sign it now, I said. But I hope you do soon. He didn't move. I stood. I'll be leaving first, I added. Not out of cruelty, but because I want to remember that I walked away before you could make me beg. The rain had lightened by the time I stepped outside. The clouds had cracked open into soft streaks of gold across the skyline, Vanguard's version of a sunset. Quiet, scattered, a little messy. I walked slowly. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. Not Nathan. Not my past. Not myself. I had stopped explaining. And it was the most powerful silence I'd ever known. Back at the gallery that evening, Zoe looked up from her laptop as I walked in. You okay? I nodded. Better than okay. She watched me carefully. You sure? I finally gave him the papers. Her lips parted in surprise. Wow. Finally. He said he thought we still had time. What did you say? I told him the truth, I said. That I used to think love was about explaining yourself again and again until you were understood. And now I know love doesn't need a translator. Zoe reached into her desk drawer and pulled out 2 chocolate bars. We're celebrating, she declared. For the divorce? For your voice. That night I opened my studio journal. I flipped to a blank page and wrote in big bold letters. You don't have to stay soft just because someone forgot how to hold you. Then I picked up a brush and dipped it in paint. And for the first time in years I created not for the gallery, not for approval, not to impress. But just for me. The morning of the exhibition, the city looked like a canvas of fog and steel. A quiet hush sat over the skyline as if Vanguard itself were holding its breath. Inside the gallery, though, everything was alive. Artists bustled around last-minute details. Critics and buyers milled near the entrance. Staff checked lighting, straightened placards, and laid fresh catalogs on glossy tables. Zoe bounced from room to room with her tablet running logistics. Me. I stood in the center of it all, calm, still, centered. Tonight was the unveiling of our largest exhibit yet, Reclaiming Space, a series curated over 6 months, featuring installations by female artists reclaiming identity, silence, and ownership. And every piece somehow reflected what I'd lost and what I'd found. Zoe appeared beside me with a clipboard. You good? She asked. I am. No nerves. I looked around. Not anymore. She smiled. I'll do one last walkthrough. I nodded, then turned toward my office for a moment alone. As I closed the door behind me, my phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. I signed the papers. Good luck tonight. That was it. No signature. No question mark. No plea. Just a clean line. I stared at the screen for a moment. There were no tears. No flashbacks. No what-ifs. Just relief. I typed nothing in return. I didn't need to. The chapter had already closed. The event that evening surpassed anything I had imagined. Reviewers from Art Forum, Modern Curator, and the New York Lens walked the halls with interest and awe. Collectors stopped to ask questions. Young artists cried in front of sculptures that mirrored their own stories. And I stood in a black structured dress, hair pinned low, hands clasped behind my back, observing the room with quiet pride. Nathan didn't come. I hadn't expected him to. But somewhere between the first glass of champagne and the last question from a journalist, I realized something. I didn't wonder if he would show up. I didn't look for his face in the crowd. I didn't brace myself for his presence. Because for once I wasn't performing for his gaze. This night, this life, was mine. Back at the residence, long after midnight, I kicked off my heels and sank into the couch. Zoe had left 2 hours earlier after sending a celebratory group selfie to the staff thread. The gallery was locked. The lights were off. Only my little studio corner remained lit. I walked over to the tucked-away door, unlocking it with the small key I'd kept on a chain since my arrival in Vanguard. The room was simple. White walls, shelves lined with half-used tubes of paint, 3 empty canvases, and 1 unfinished sketch resting against the far wall. I hadn't stepped in here since my first week. That night I opened a jar of crimson and touched brush to canvas for the first time in years. Not for show. Not for sale. Just to see what it felt like to create without permission. By the end of the week I had finished 2 small pieces. Zoe caught me in the act on a Tuesday morning. She paused at the door holding coffee and a folder, blinking in surprise. Wait, is that your work? I wiped my hands on a cloth. I was just experimenting. She stepped closer, eyes wide. Clara, this is really good. I raised an eyebrow. I haven't painted in years. Well, she said, setting the coffee down, maybe you needed to stop curating everyone else's voice so you could hear your own again. I looked at the piece. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, raw, alive. The following month, I agreed to let the gallery host a small, private showcase of my work. No press. No official marketing. Just a quiet evening of new beginnings. Elise came. A few trusted collectors came. The artists I'd curated with showed up with flowers and flutes of wine. When I stepped into the room that evening, I saw something I hadn't expected. My work, my story moved people. And I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. One of the sculptors hugged me and whispered, "It feels like your canvas finally forgave you." Maybe it had. Maybe I had. A week later, I received an email from Nathan. It was brief and professional. "Clara, I'm working on a cultural foundation aimed at supporting emerging visual artists. There's talk of establishing a permanent residency wing in Vanguard. I'd like to partner on this if you're open. Strictly professional, of course." I read it twice. No manipulation. No flattery. Just a proposal. I forwarded it to Zoe first. She responded, "He finally learned to knock before barging in. That's growth, I guess." I replied to Nathan the next morning. "Thank you for the proposal. Let's schedule a call with our legal teams present to discuss framework and boundaries. If we collaborate, it will be as professionals, nothing more." He responded in minutes. "Understood. I respect that." Looking forward. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel nervous. I just felt ready. Later that night, I sat in my studio looking at the newest painting on my easel. It was abstract. Messy. Bold. A chaos of blues and silvers and streaks of rust red. I called it winter sunlight. I didn't know what it meant yet. But I knew it came from a place I hadn't touched in years. And that was enough. There was something oddly poetic about discussing art with a man who once ignored mine. Nathan Hale sat across the long mahogany conference table, flanked by his executive assistant and a corporate liaison. I had Zoe to my right, our gallery's legal counsel to my left, and a curated composure that never cracked. The room at the Vanguard Cultural Council felt more like a courtroom than a creative space, but I preferred it that way. No vulnerability. No reminiscing. Just numbers. Goals. Contracts. Just business. "We're proposing an annual grant to support early career curators in underrepresented communities," Nathan said, scrolling through a deck on his tablet. His voice was calm, clear. There was no hint of the man who once forgot my birthday twice in a row. I nodded. "And where does the board stand on artistic autonomy for recipients?" "They'll have full freedom," he replied. "We'll only offer funding and professional mentorship. No curation interference." I met his eyes. "That's non-negotiable on my end." A brief flicker of something, maybe pride, maybe regret, passed through his face before he nodded. "Understood. Autonomy it is." Zoe scribbled a note beside me, then leaned in. "He's surprisingly coachable." I bit back a smile. The meetings continued for weeks. 3 in total. Always in daylight. Always in glass-walled rooms. Nathan never stayed longer than necessary. He never made jokes. Never reminisced. He shook hands, offered clean summaries and left. It was strange at first, like watching a mirage become human. The Nathan I had loved was charismatic, distracted, casually cruel without meaning to be. This Nathan was focused, humbled, maybe even sorry. But I didn't ask. And he didn't say. We had agreed, unspoken but clear, that this foundation would be the only thing we ever built together again. And for once I didn't need more than that. By spring, the Vanguard Arts Forward Foundation was ready to launch. A press event was scheduled at the Modernist Pavilion, a sleek architectural marvel filled with soaring glass and steel columns. The media list was impressive. Art Forum, Vanguard Voice, even a feature request from the New York Times. I stood backstage with Zoe reviewing remarks. "I kept it short," I told her. "You always do. You like to let the work speak." Words fail me when I'm asked to perform in front of ghosts. She reached for my hand. "You're not haunted anymore, Clara." "I know," I said softly. "That's why I'm finally here." Nathan stepped up to the podium first. I watched from stage left, arms folded loosely. He looked sharp, tailored charcoal suit, navy tie, no trace of the boyish arrogance he once wore like cologne. "Good evening," he began. "It's an honor to stand here today as we launch the Vanguard Arts Forward Foundation." A dozen camera shutters clicked. He spoke confidently about the importance of giving young artists a platform, about the intersection of community and creativity, about cultural responsibility in an increasingly commercial world. Then came the question. A journalist from Vanguard Voice raised her hand. "What inspired this project, Mr. Hale? It seems like a shift from your usual philanthropic focus." He paused. For one breath, maybe two, and then said slowly, "I was fortunate to work with someone who reminded me that art isn't just expression. It's courage. It's choosing to speak even when no one's listening." A longer pause. "She opened my eyes to the value of art, and the courage it takes to protect it." Gasps and pens moved across notepads. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. When I walked onto the stage to give my remarks, I didn't look in his direction. I addressed the crowd with poise. We live in a world that demands explanation, that asks us to justify our colors, our brushstrokes, our voices. But art doesn't need justification, only space. I didn't speak long, just long enough to leave them thinking. As I exited, Nathan stepped aside, letting me pass without a word. I nodded once. A small, polite gesture. He returned it with the faintest smile. There was no invitation in it. No lingering question. Just respect. After the event, Zoe and I lingered at the back while press agents wrapped up final interviews. She nudged me. "He handled that question well." "He did. Are you okay?" "I am." "Does it bother you what he said? Or didn't say?" I thought about it. No. He said enough. Because for once the message wasn't about regret, or love, or what could have been. It was about acknowledgement. And that was all I had ever wanted from him. Not flowers, not closure. Just the truth. Even if it came too late. That night, I returned to my studio and pulled out an old canvas I hadn't touched in years. It was half finished. A swirl of cold hues, sharp edges, messy light. I didn't fix it. I painted over it. And started again. Because I wasn't trying to repair what was broken anymore. I was building something new from the ashes. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, slipped quietly between gallery invitations and foundation mail. Cream-colored. Thick. Embossed in gold. My name, Ms. Clara Evans, was written in looping, delicate script. I recognized the handwriting. Grace Song. The card inside was simple. "You are warmly invited to the wedding of Grace Song and Nathan Hale, on the 16th of October at the Glasshouse Gardens, Vanguard." At the bottom, a handwritten note. "Thank you for everything. Without you, I don't think he would have grown into the man I'm marrying. I hope we can meet again, this time as women with open hearts, not wounded ones. No pretense. No hidden edges. Just honesty." Zoe stood at the gallery window reading it beside me. "So, you're going?" I nodded. "Yes." "You sure?" I thought about it. About how far I'd come. About how it didn't sting anymore. About how my hands no longer shook when someone said his name. "Yes," I repeated. "I'm going. Not for him. For me." The Glasshouse Gardens were bathed in late autumn sun. Maple leaves rustled gold along the aisle. Strings of white roses trailed over archways and trellises. The air smelled of jasmine and fresh linen. Everything was elegant. Subtle. Not extravagant, but thoughtful. Grace had always been the kind of woman who noticed details. As I took my seat, third row not too close, I saw Nathan waiting at the altar. He looked different. Softer around the eyes. Straighter posture. Hands calm at his sides. He glanced around briefly. Our eyes met for a moment. No tension. No guilt. Just an acknowledgement. We were no longer halves of a broken thing. Just two people who once collided. Then came Grace. She walked down the aisle in a silk gown that shimmered like moonlight, hair pinned with pearls, eyes glowing, not with triumph but peace. She didn't glance at the crowd. She looked only at him. And he, Nathan Hale, looked at her like he finally understood what devotion meant. I watched their vows. Watched their fingers intertwine. Watched the officiant declare a future I once imagined. And I didn't flinch. Because none of it was mine anymore. After the ceremony, as guests milled about the garden reception, Grace found me by the koi pond. "I didn't think you'd come," she said gently. "You invited me." She smiled. "Still, most people wouldn't." "I'm not most people." "I know." We stood in silence, the wind stirring her veil slightly. She glanced down. "I used to resent you. Before I even met you. Because I thought I was competing with a version of Nathan who still loved someone else." I raised an eyebrow. "And now? Now I realize you weren't the one he couldn't forget." She met my eyes. "You were the one who helped him remember who he was supposed to become." I didn't answer. Because I didn't need to. She held out a hand. I took it. And in that moment I knew there was no bitterness between us. Just parallel lines that once intersected. Then chose different skies. I left the wedding just before sunset. No dramatic exits. No final glances. Just a quiet walk through fallen leaves, back to a car waiting beneath amber trees. Back to a life fully mine. Weeks later I stood in my studio, staring at a painting I had finally completed. It was titled Parallel Lines. 2 streaks of color, once tangled, now moving side by side in separate directions. I didn't cry. I smiled. Because sometimes, letting go isn't weakness. It's the most courageous thing we do. That winter, the board of the Parisian Modern Art Initiative offered me the role of artistic director. They called it a once-in-a-decade appointment. I accepted. Not because I needed escape, but because I was ready for expansion. On my last day at the Vanguard Gallery, Zoe hugged me tightly. "Paris won't know what hit it," she said into my shoulder. "I'll come back for the spring gala." "You better." "And Clara?" "You're the reason I applied to art school again." I blinked. "You what?" He grinned. "Even curators get to dream, you know. You taught me that." And just like that my heart swelled. Because the seeds I planted, in art and people, were blooming. Even beyond me. 1 week later, a package arrived at my temporary flat in Paris. No note. Just an old canvas inside. Winter Sunlight. The original one. The messy, half-painted thing I once buried under years of dust. And a post-it in familiar handwriting. "It belongs to the one who created it. NH. I stared at it for a long time. Then I hung it in my Paris office. Right above my desk. Not as a memory. But as a reminder. That I didn't lose myself. I returned to her. And if Nathan Hale in another city told his wife about the woman who once taught him silence could speak, then so be it. And if Grace, in a moment of her own strength, ever found herself doubting, I hoped she'd remember. We were all broken once. But we are allowed to rebuild. I stepped out onto my Paris balcony holding a fresh cup of coffee. Below, the Seine shimmered like a poem. And as the city breathed around me, wild, alive, unfinished, I whispered to no one. I'm still the artist. But no. I'm also the masterpiece. The end.